She fined me $500 for fishing in my own neighborhood lake. The same lake where I had been fishing every morning for 12 years. The same spot where my wife and I shared our last peaceful mornings before cancer took her away. $500 for dropping a line into water that was supposed to be community property when I bought my house in 2011. I stood in my driveway holding my tackle box, morning dew still clinging to my boots, staring at a citation that claimed I needed a $200 annual permit for recreational water usage by non-residents. Non-resident? I have lived here since Obama's first term. Sarah and I used to sit on that dock every single morning until she could no longer make the walk. The smell of the lake was still fresh on my clothes, and I could hear Sarah's memorial wind chime sing softly in the distance, the one Patricia would later try to fine me for too. That morning should have been peaceful. Instead, grief turned into fury. I'm Marcus Brennan, 52 years old, retired electrician turned neighborhood handyman. We moved to Willowbrook Estates 12 years ago because the development brochures promised lake access, fishing, kayaking, and all the simple quiet joys of lakefront community living. Sarah and I didn't want extravagance, just a modest ranch home on Maple Street with a kitchen window that framed the water at sunrise. For 8 years we had paradise. Every morning at 6 we walked to the lake, fishing rods in hand, coffee strong enough to wake the dead in our thermos, gravel crunching under our boots as the mist rose off the water. Sarah would cast her line and we would sit talking about everything and nothing while the sun painted streaks of orange and pink over the surface. Those mornings became sacred after her diagnosis. Between chemo sessions and sleepless nights, we found our only moments of peace on that shoreline. After she passed 3 years ago, I kept the ritual alive. Every morning I still go down to the water and fish, as if the act somehow keeps her alive with me, her laughter echoing in the plop of the lure on the surface, her voice in the ripples spreading across the water. But now Patricia had turned it into a crime. 8 years ago, the HOA formed when the last developer lots were sold. At the start it was simple courtesy rules. Keep your lawn maintained, don't paint your house neon green, clean up after your dog. I even voted for it. Nobody wanted a neighbor with car parts rusting in front yards. But then came Patricia Whitmore. She was a real estate agent, younger than me, who moved into one of the McMansions on the north side. Within a year, she had charmed her way onto the board and by her second year she was president. Imagine someone who actually carries a ruler in her purse to measure lawns, drives a white BMW with vanity plates, and flashes a predatory smile she must have practiced in a mirror. That was Patricia, and she's been re-elected 3 terms in a row. Her husband sits on the city council, which gives her enough political clout to make her truly dangerous. 6 months ago, Patricia's board quietly changed the lake access rules without a public vote. Now they required residents to buy $200 annual permits to fish or kayak. But they never mailed anything. It was hidden deep in some HOA website portal nobody uses. So when Patricia saw me casting a line on Tuesday morning, she didn't see a grieving widower holding onto memories. She saw dollar signs. $500 citation plus a $200 permit fee meant $700 straight into her HOA fund. Easy money from the man she thought would not fight back. I marched straight to her real estate office, which doubled as the HOA headquarters. The place smelled like stale coffee-fighting lemon-scented air freshener, furnished with cheap plastic chairs that stuck to my legs. Patricia sat behind an oversized desk like a queen on her throne, manicured nails clicking out a rhythm against polished wood. "Rules are rules, Mr. Brennan," she said without looking up from her computer. "Ignorance is not an excuse for non-compliance." I told her about Sarah, about our mornings together, about how I had been fishing in that exact spot long before she even moved here. She looked me in the eye and said, "I'm sure your late wife would want you to follow proper guidelines. Payment is due in 30 days or legal action proceeds." It felt like she spit on Sarah's memory. That's when I realized this wasn't about rules. Patricia wanted to establish control and prove that she could crush whoever stood in her way. She thought I'd cave. She had no idea what she just started. By Thursday, another letter threatened to place a lien on my house. And Patricia proved she wasn't bluffing. Every morning after that, she made compliance patrols in her glossy BMW, slowing to take photos of my trash cans if they were out too long, snapping pictures of my truck parked an inch off my driveway edge. Then she pushed the cruelty too far. A citation appeared in my mailbox claiming unsightly yard ornament. That ornament was Sarah's copper wind chime, the last gift I ever gave her, the one that still caught the morning breeze with a sound like her voice lingering in the air. Patricia had turned peace into punishment, memory into violation, and grief into rage. But instead of exploding like she expected, I went quiet. And I remembered everything I had learned from 30 years of electrical work. When a circuit fails, you trace it back to the source and expose the fault. Patricia thought she could break me with fines. She didn't realize I was about to follow the wiring straight back to its root and shut down her whole power. Patricia's so-called fine for phishing was only the opening shot. Within days, she escalated into a full campaign. Every morning, her white BMW crept past my driveway like it was on a patrol route, stopping long enough for her to lift a phone and snap pictures. If my garbage can sat 3 hours too long at the curb, click. If my truck tires leaned an inch over the edge of my driveway, click. But the cruelest of her attacks came when she issued me a citation for an unsightly yard ornament. That ornament was Sarah's copper wind chime, the last gift I gave my wife before she died. I had built it myself out of copper pipe, and when the breeze caught it, it sang the sharp, gentle notes of our mornings together. Patricia labeled it unsightly. Reading that citation felt like she had spit on my wife's grave. My blood boiled, but I refused to give her the explosion she wanted. I went methodical instead. 30 years as an electrician had taught me how to problem solve when everything looks broken. When a system fails, you trace the wiring back to the source to find where the fault lies. If Patricia wanted a game of paperwork, rules, and authority, I'd beat her at her own game. But I'd do it with facts, documents, and the kind of precision that had kept electrical systems running safely under my watch for decades. The next morning I drove into downtown and walked down the cold stone steps of the county courthouse. The place smelled like stale coffee, cigarettes, and old paper tucked into filing cabinets that looked older than I was. The records office sat in the basement under flickering fluorescent lights, a dungeon of forgotten ledgers and dusty maps. The clerk, an older woman named Betty who had probably been working since the Carter administration, looked at me with tired eyes but still smiled when I explained what I was after. HOA records, original deeds, anything connected to Willowbrook Estates since the development was built. You'd be surprised, she said as she rolled out a Carter files. Most people never check the original filings. They just assume the HOA knows what it's doing. For 6 hours I sat in that basement surrounded by boxes full of crumbling paper, fueled by vending machine coffee that tasted like it was brewed in 1987. My back ached, my head pounded, but eventually I found it, gold buried under a mountain of dust. When Willowbrook was first platted, the developer had written in the original property deeds that lake access was granted to all residents in perpetuity. Not just a sales pitch. It was legally binding. It was right there in black and white. And then I saw something even bigger. Changes to covenants required 75% approval of homeowners, properly documented and filed with the county. Patricia's board had never filed anything. They had no record of a vote, no signatures, no documentation of the so-called permit system. Patricia's phishing fines weren't just petty, they were illegal. I leaned back in that plastic courthouse chair, staring at the proof in my hands while Sarah's wind chime echoed in my thoughts. Patricia had been ruling with intimidation and smug smiles, but all along she was standing on sand. I tucked the documents under my arm and walked out of that courthouse with a new fire in my chest. This was no longer just a widower fighting for his morning ritual. This was a fight for the very soul of our neighborhood. And I had just found the fault line that could bring the whole system crashing down. That night I sat on my porch, coffee in hand, as the copper wind chime played in the evening breeze. Patricia thought she had won by turning my memories into violations. She had no idea what I had found buried in the dusty records room. She had no idea that her authority was a lie. The papers from the courthouse were the first sparks. But if I was going to bring down Patricia's paper kingdom, I needed witnesses. One man against a board could still be dismissed as a crank, but neighbors with proof and history? That was an army. The first ally I turned to was Doris Kavinsky, 78 years old, 4'0" in orthopedic shoes, but tougher than leather. She had been one of the very first homeowners when Willowbrook was built, and she had attended every single HOA meeting since the neighborhood started. Her memory was sharper than Patricia's heels. I sat in her living room surrounded by floral wallpaper and porcelain figurines while she sipped her Earl Grey. "Honey," she said, "there was never a vote on lake permits. I'd have raised absolute hell if there was. I would remember. Enforceable my foot. That woman just makes up rules and expects people to fold." Doris had been waiting a long time for someone to push back. With her on my side, I now had a witness with credibility stretching back further than Patricia's entire time living here. Then came Mrs. Rodriguez. Patricia had tried to ruin her too, citing her backyard vegetable garden 3 years back as a violation because it disrupted neighborhood aesthetics. Mrs. Rodriguez had fought back and won. So when Patricia showed up at her house trying to smear me, saying residents should beware of me because of my mental instability after losing Sarah, Mrs. Rodriguez threw her out on the curb before the faucet I had been installing had even finished dripping. She later brought me coffee and churros and shared story after story of Patricia's petty cruelty. That woman carried the scars of Patricia's bullying and was tired of staying quiet. Then there was Janet Hoffman, the quiet military wife whose husband was always deployed overseas. She had been documenting Patricia's veiled threats for months, waiting for the day someone made a move. I didn't know it, but she had files upon files of recorded statements, photos, and notes showing a clear pattern of harassment. When I told her what I had found in the courthouse, her eyes lit with something sharp. "I've been waiting for this," she said. "Time to make the record official." Word began to spread. The Hendricksons told me about fines for rose bushes growing 2 inches too far. The Bennetts whispered about their son's basketball hoop being 6 inches too close to the street. Even old Mr. Peterson had been fined for flying his American flag improperly, according to Patricia's tastes. Everyone had a story. Everyone had been quietly stewing. All it took was someone standing up first. Meanwhile, I kept documenting Patricia's harassment of me. Every photo she took of my garbage bins, every note she slipped into my mailbox, every unsightly ornament citation. I logged and dated them all. My record looked less like a homeowner's file and more like a case study in psychological warfare. The real showdown came at the next HOA board meeting. The folding chairs squeaked, the fluorescent lights buzzed. 30 residents filled the room, more than usual by far. Patricia stood at the front in her navy blazer, perfect hair, fake smile. She started her speech in that authoritative voice meant to intimidate. "We are here today to address ongoing violations threatening community standards." Her eyes were locked on me like I was a criminal in her courtroom. That's when I stood. Calm. Confident. Records folder in hand. And I presented my timeline. I read out my courthouse findings, that the lake was community property guaranteed in perpetuity, that rule changes required 75% resident approval and proper filings, none of which existed. I detailed my harassment file. I described Patricia fining me for a wind chime that was my wife's memorial. I said her rules were nothing but intimidation without authority. The room went silent. You could hear the air conditioning cough. Patricia faltered for just a second before covering it up with more of her smug rhetoric. But the silence wasn't hers anymore. Then Janet stood. She began reading from her months of notes documenting how Patricia had threatened her in private conversations. Doris shook her head and confirmed no vote ever happened. Then one by one, neighbors raised their hands and spoke. Mr. Bennett described his garden gnome citation. The Johnsons revealed the warning their son's hoop brought. Mr. Peterson talked about his flag. Each story stacked on top of the last until Patricia's carefully crafted authority collapsed under the weight of truth. For the first time, Patricia looked shaken, her lips tight, her smile vanishing. Her husband Richard sat in the corner, arms crossed, face tight, like he wished he could be anywhere else. When the meeting adjourned, Patricia cornered me in the parking lot under harsh fluorescent lights buzzing above us. "You have no idea what you're starting, Mr. Brennan," she hissed. "This community was peaceful before you decided to stir trouble." I looked her in the eye and said evenly, "This community was peaceful when people could fish without being extorted." She sputtered for a second, and even Richard seemed to nod before catching himself. That night, as I walked home, I saw more porch lights than usual on. Neighbors in small clusters were gathering in their driveways, talking quietly. What Patricia hadn't realized yet was that she had made her biggest mistake. She had united her victims. I thought my greatest weapon would be the documents proving Patricia never had the vote to change the rules. I was wrong. The real bombshell came from Maria, the sharp-eyed paralegal working under my attorney Tom. I was elbow-deep in a garbage disposal repair when my phone buzzed. Her voice crackled with excitement. "Marcus, drop everything and get down here. You need to see this." 20 minutes later, I was standing in Tom's office, staring at a conference table buried under decades of records and maps. Maria pointed to a yellowing document from 1987, her finger tapping the page so hard I thought she might poke through. Patricia's been charging for access to property the HOA never owned. I felt my chest tighten as Maria laid it out. When Willowbrook Estates was first developed, the lake was owned by Willowbrook Development LLC. The company dissolved in the 90s, but the record of ownership never transferred to residents or the HOA. When they walked away, the property reverted to the county as abandoned commercial land. The HOA had been pretending to own it ever since, illegally collecting fees for access and harassing residents with citations based on power they didn't even have. Here's the kicker, Maria said, pulling up a county notice. That lake is going up for county surplus auction in 6 weeks. Minimum bid $125,000. Current registered bidders, 0. I stared at the screen, my hand shaking. In that moment I thought of Sarah. Her life insurance policy had sat untouched for 3 years because I could never bring myself to use it. She would have said, "Spend it on something meaningful, Marcus. Spend it on a cause that matters." The numbers clicked into place. I had $180,000 set aside from her policy. Enough to buy the very lake Patricia had weaponized against me. Enough to end her reign once and for all. The irony was sharp enough to laugh at. Patricia had built her fake authority on that water. She had harassed me for visiting it, fined me for fishing, called Sarah's wind chime unsightly, and now she was about to discover she never truly owned any of it. And soon, I would. I formed a plan. Doris turned her kitchen into a headquarters, brewing coffee as strong as jet fuel while neighbors crowded around her dining table. Janet brought her military-trained efficiency, breaking the tasks down into color-coded spreadsheets that looked like an invasion plan. Mrs. Rodriguez built connections with families too scared to speak up, translating, gathering support, and letting them know they weren't alone. Detective Kim started tracking harassment formally. The group grew larger every week. We stopped being scattered victims. We were organizing resistance. Meanwhile, Patricia doubled down. 6 more citations dropped in just 4 weeks, including a $300 fine issued to Mr. Bennett for improper garden gnome positioning. She levied fines against the Hendersons for grass edges, against the Johnson kids for sidewalk chalk. She even fined Mr. Peterson again, this time for flying his flag too high. Every move she made only strengthened our case, every letter another nail in the coffin she was unknowingly hammering herself into. We kept the discovery about the auction secret. If Patricia or her allies caught wind of it, they'd scramble or pull strings to interfere. Our team met only in Doris's basement where Patricia's BMW couldn't lurk. The musty smell of old rugs, lavender sachets, and strong coffee became the scent of rebellion. At night I sat on my porch listening to Sarah's wind chime, cleaning her tackle box, her silver lure glinting in the lamplight. I promised her I would cast it first once the water was ours. She always believed peace was better than grudges. That was the choice I faced. When I owned the lake, I could lock it down in vengeance, make Patricia squirm at every step. Or I could open it fully, restore what the community had been promised 12 years ago. I knew what Sarah would have wanted. Healing, not revenge. As the auction drew near, Patricia prepared her final big power play. She scheduled an emergency HOA meeting for Memorial Day Monday. The agenda was terrifying. New $2,000 assessments for every household to fund enhanced security and legal protections. In plain words, she was trying to raise money to protect her failing grip on the community. She thought she'd get her triumph. She didn't understand that 2 days before her meeting, I would buy the crown jewel of her power base out from under her. Friday night before the auction, I sat by the lake one last time as a powerless resident, wind whispering over calm ripples. I whispered to Sarah that tomorrow I would either save the place we loved or lose it to developers and see it paved into parking lots. Either way, Patricia's reign over this water was ending. What she didn't know yet was that the end of her kingdom was already written. Saturday morning carried the kind of crisp spring air that makes you believe in new beginnings. I drove to the county courthouse with a certified check for $185,000 folded neatly inside an envelope, the last of Sarah's life insurance and a piece of my house mortgaged for collateral. It wasn't just money, it was my lifeline and the final weapon in a war I never chose but refused to lose. The auction room smelled like old wood polish and nervous sweat. 2 developers in crisp suits whispered about drainage feasibility and retail potential, treating the lake as if it were nothing but a line on a profit sheet. An elderly man studied paperwork about recreational rights, likely dreaming of an exclusive fishing retreat. I sat still, fists clenched around the bidding number I held, trying to keep Sarah's voice in my heart and Tom's advice in my head. Stay calm, Marcus. This isn't about money. This is about memory, justice, and community. The auctioneer's voice boomed as he opened the bid at $125,000. The first developer raised to $140 without hesitation, the second countered at $155, and suddenly the price of my piece was climbing fast. The elderly man bowed out at $165, leaving me staring at two sharks with deeper pockets. One of them bid $170. My pulse pounded, my throat went dry. Sarah's memory was on the line. Without overthinking, I raised my paddle and called $175. The room held its breath. The second developer consulted his phone, calculating margins with a cold efficiency. Then he raised his own paddle. $180. My stomach turned, but every neighbor's story echoed in my head. Mrs. Rodriguez's garden, Doris remembering the promises, Janet's notes, Mr. Bennett's gnomes, Sarah's wind chimes in the morning breeze. I raised my card firmly. $185. Silence filled the oak-paneled room. The auctioneer glanced at the developers. Going once. The first shook his head. Going twice. The second cursed under his breath, then lowered his hand. Sold, the auctioneer shouted, slamming the gavel, to bidder number 4, $185,000. The room fell away in a blur as I signed the deed paperwork. My hand trembled as the clerk stamped the file. In 3 strokes of a pen, Sarah's lake became mine. No longer the playground of a petty tyrant in a BMW, but part of the legacy Sarah and I built together. 2 days later, Patricia strutted into her emergency HOA meeting expecting triumph. The community center was packed wall to wall with neighbors, reporters, and cameras. She wore her navy blazer and that sharp smile, her husband trailing behind with the exhausted look of a man dragged into battles he didn't believe in. Patricia declared, "We must impose a $2,000 assessment on every household to protect our neighborhood from disruptive elements." She spoke with the confidence of someone who believed she still held absolute authority. That's when I stood up and walked to the front, holding the deed high. "Before you talk about new fees," I said, my voice steady, "the community deserves to know something. As of Saturday morning, I purchased Willowbrook Lake at public county auction. It belongs to me. It was never yours. The HOA has been collecting fees for property it never owned. Every fine, every permit, every restriction Patricia has issued was based on false authority." The room erupted. Gasps, shouts, applause. Patricia froze, her face draining of color. Then she screamed, "This is fraud. This man is conspiring against me. This will not stand." But Doris rose from her chair and said calmly, "What won't stand is you stealing from us for years." Janet presented her records. Mr. Bennett waved photographs. One after another, residents spoke up, and Patricia lost the room she believed belonged to her. Detective Kim stepped forward, serving her with a restraining order. "Mrs. Whitmore, further harassment will result in criminal charges." The papers slapped into her hand louder than any gavel. Patricia lost composure, her voice cracking into shrieks. "This community was peaceful before he stirred it up. You have no idea what you're all doing." But for the first time in years, the neighbors were not afraid. They applauded as she stormed out, shrieking all the way to her BMW. In the weeks that followed, Patricia and Richard put their house up for sale. The neighborhood, free from her shadow, transformed almost overnight. Families gathered by the lake again. Children skipped stones. Retirees met with fishing rods at sunrise. Instead of citations and fines, there was laughter, cooperation, and real community. The first Sarah Brennan Memorial Fishing Fund was launched, funded by restitution from the illegal lake fees Patricia had collected, helping children get equipment to learn the simple joy of fishing. Every evening now, I sit by the lake as the sun dips low, Sarah's copper wind chime singing above my porch. I see families casting lines, teenagers kayaking, kids squealing as they skip stones across calm water. That's what she would have wanted. Community, not tyranny. Peace, not punishment. Sometimes justice does not come from shouting or fighting. Sometimes it comes from patience, evidence, and the strength to stand your ground. Patricia thought she was the queen of Willowbrook. In the end, she was nothing but a petty dictator who built her throne on stolen ground. And when the truth came out, she lost everything. I look at the water now, golden under the evening light, and I whisper to Sarah, "We won."